every morning on Morehouse, on Atlanta University campus, there were 5 cars that escorted her. Two with policemen in the front, she's in the middle, and two in the back. When Madeline got to the high school, she never knew what was going to happen during the times when they were having, I guess you would call it lab. They might throw a rat in there, so forth. But anyway, Madeline stuck it out. She finished. Would you believe 5 years later, the ratio had reversed? There were only 5 whites and the rest of them were black. That just shows you how the civil rights shifted in just a few years. At the 20th anniversary of Hope, which was an organization that tried to bring some sanity, they asked Madeline the question, would you do it again? And Madeline said yes. She went on to become a lawyer. She's now here, retired. The young man is in New Jersey. I will not call his name because a part of his family, is still living. But that just shows you how Jesse Hill became a person to look out for those people who were disenfranchised because they were really trying to do the right thing. The other thing is there were people who did what we call the little things that are big things, but we never know them. I understand when I was doing the research for the book and during the 40th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement, they say there was there was a woman who would make sandwiches, catch the bus, and come to the Atlanta University Assembly with sandwiches to make sure that there was food for those students who had to do their lessons and didn't have the time to go out and find somewhere to eat. So these are the kinds of people that really helped the movement grow. And of course, you think about people like Mr. Russell, who gave money for them to get out of jail. You think of Leroy Johnson, all of these persons who really helped in the civil rights movement. Now, another facet that people don't realize, I worked with student teachers. In other words, I trained student teachers from 1949 to 1986. They too were involved because where we used to send our student teachers, black ones, to black schools, that changed. And I remember my first trip was O'Keefe High School, which is now condominiums. And I remember where we used to send, say, 5 black students to David T. Howard when they were integrated. I guess numbers were important to those who had to make the assignments, and instead of sending 5, they would send 1 or they would send 2. And I remember my first encounter, and the student teacher came back and she said, she doesn't understand the black people. These were the kids who were coming from the Tech Wood homes who were coming to O'Keefe. The problem was because the white students who came from the area of Centennial, where Centennial School is now, they could go home and rest and do their homework. Most of those young boys, their mothers were on drugs, they did not have fathers, and instead of going home, they went to take whatever jobs they could to support the family. They left the job at 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, they were sleeping tired. They got up, and they may have been lazy, but they came, and sometimes they said that the reason was not because that they were lazy, but because of the responsibilities and the toll it was taking. So it was my job, not only, that was just one instance, to have to go and do the education of the people who were involved in student teaching. So that was another facet. So I'm not going on and on that because it just shows you how complex. In my book, someone asked me, how did I think things had grown since the time we have? I would say there are some things that have grown. We're in more schools of diverse kinds of schools. We also hold many political offices. But as Robert Frost says, we have miles and miles to go before we sleep. I would like to talk a little bit about Michael Mann's family because I've known them a long, long time and to realize what they have meant to the city of Atlanta. I remember his grandfather when he was associated with Fort Valley State College, but I remember him most when he was
Go ahead and give his name.
Dr. Horace Mann. I'm sorry. But anyway, at the same time, I was the chair of the Department of Education at Clark. His grandfather was the chair of the Department of AU. And I was just talking before the meeting, and I said, even before we knew of a Gates who tried to trace our genetic background, that his father was interested because they had to do research to get masters. And he was trying to find out the communities from which the most talented blacks came from, and he would have them with these great big sheets to do a timeline of their various families, and you could see that you all knew they were going to his office because you could see them. I'm sure that if he had lived, he would have been doing the same thing. Of course, he didn't have the kinds of resources that we have today, but it was a beginning. And I think many people might not have known that it was his grandfather who was a pioneer in that and many other things. He was a very brilliant gentleman. Maybe you can ask me the question of something else you would want me to talk about.
Sure. When I asked you about how the integration of Grady Memorial impacted the community, impacted the students, impacted nursing students, tell us about Grady.
Well, I guess I have a story about everything, but as you know, one side of the street was for whites and Butler, and the other side was was for the blacks. But since you triggered that, I would just like to talk about Walter White, because this is a very interesting thing about Grady before we get to the nurses. As you know, Walter White was very fair, and they lived on Houston Street, which is now named after Maynard's father. I can't think of the name of the street, grandfather. But anyway, he was ill, and they sent him to the ambulance ahead of the family. When he got to Grady, as usual, they thought he was white, so they sent him to the white side. Of course, when Walter White and the family got there, they went to the black side. And would you believe it? Transporting him from the white side to the black side. We don't know whether that was the cause of his death or not. But it really triggered the emotions of that white family, and that is why Walter was so much an integral part of the NAACP movement, because that was what had happened to his father. And it was the same thing. They had the